Hi, this is Dan Sullivan, and today I'm coming at you from Gorham, Maine. I'm actually here with a friend of mine. We're doing a deep work trip. If you haven't heard of Deep Work, it's a great book by a guy named Cal Newport. And essentially the premise of the book is to get away and totally disconnect so that you can work deeply and get a ton done. So that's what I thought I would do, shoot a couple videos while I'm here. We've got a beautiful setting here. And it's a beautiful day out today, so I was getting some vitamin D outside. But anyway, so for this week's video, I've got a great question from Chris, who he's talking about, so he has a couple questions here. Carb cutting isn't required for weight loss, only a calorie deficit is. Also, the difference between simple and complex carbs and their uses to benefit physical activity. And he doubts that I ever went into a hockey game on a carb-free diet. And that would be correct, although I would do it definitely differently now, knowing what I now know. So let's talk about carb cutting isn't required for weight loss. And he is right. It isn't necessarily required for weight loss. However, carbohydrates have a significant effect on insulin and blood sugar, and those in turn have a huge effect on the body's ability to burn fat or the lack thereof. So when you have an excessive amount of carbohydrates in the diet, or a lot of simple carbohydrates, which he touches on here, simple versus complex carbs, that has a radical effect on the body and its ability to burn fat. So when you include a lot of simple carbohydrates in your diet, the body has a terrible time trying to burn fat as fuel. It likes to put the brakes right on that mechanism. So when insulin is present in the body through eating simple carbohydrates especially, it really puts the brakes on burning fats as fuels. So I'll talk about a little bit of like a nutritional ketosis type of a scenario and how that benefits you. And so what that means, being in nutritional ketosis, is cutting down on the carbohydrates to a point, but still having a lot of your more complex carbohydrates, like a lot of vegetables in the diet. So you're getting a lot of the vitamins, a lot of the nutrients that you need from carbohydrates, but not having them at a surplus level that really puts a hamper on fat loss. So you can definitely achieve fat loss only using a calorie deficit, but definitely you need to be considering stuff like food quality in there, and then also macronutrient profile. So what that means is basically fats, proteins, and carbohydrates, and the ratios of those. And so what I would do would be to definitely cut down carbohydrates to a certain point. And so that can be different for different folks, but eliminating those simple sugars, those simple carbohydrates, is going to be one of the most effective and the fastest ways of dropping weight. Those are most prevalent in obviously any kind of sodas, any kind of white things, white sugar, white bread, white flour. So eliminating that stuff is very, very easy and very effective for cutting out that excessive very sugar-laden stuff that will basically eliminate or make it very hard to lose fat, and it will also increase stuff like inflammation, which makes it difficult to lose fat as well, so by a different pathway. So he also talks about the difference between simple and complex carbohydrates. So simple carbohydrates basically raise blood sugar faster, right? So simple carbohydrates are like your simple sugars, like fruits, and like a lot of packaged goods will definitely raise blood sugar. Any kind of pastries or any kind of things that don't have that much fiber content. So things like fiber and fats and proteins all work to slow the absorption of the carbohydrates into the bloodstream. So when you have food, that's why I always recommend having a more balanced meal, including stuff like vegetables, which have very low amounts of sugar, very low amounts of simple carbohydrates, and they're much more complex because the fiber content in those vegetables are really going to be blood sugar stabilizing. So instead of having a roller coaster ride with your blood sugar, which you don't want, creates a lot of havoc in the body, a lot of inflammation, a lot of sort of like inflammatory cascades that sort of, you know, affect one thing that affect another thing. So we don't want that. So one way to avoid that is to definitely be consuming more of the complex carbohydrates that he alludes to in the question here. And those are going to be, like I said, I prefer the vegetables because they have such a low amount of sugar and they have such a high amount of fiber and other nutrients in there. You can also do some, you know, I like to recommend either some organic quinoa. Again, it's pretty carbohydrate rich, however, so I would definitely eat that in moderation. And then I would definitely eat that, you know, sort of around workout. So, you know, fueling physical activity, when you're well fueled, you know, if you have balanced blood sugar, you're going into a workout, or if you're going into a game, you know, a sporting event or what have you, that's going to be a much better scenario than if you're, you know, on a sugar high and then a crash. And so, you know, the other thing about, I mentioned nutritional ketosis before, and some of the benefits of that are, you know, getting the body to be able to burn fat as fuel more effectively, so you're not so reliant on only burning sugar as fuel. And so there's a great book, one of the first books I actually read getting into this whole, you know, paleo sort of approach and that whole game was called the Paleo Diet for the Athlete by Lauren Cordain. And he talks about actually going very minimal on the carbohydrates throughout the day, and then loading up on carbohydrates more so right in and around a workout or a sporting event. So that's sort of the approach I would probably take now. You know, if I could go back in time and then, you know, play hockey again, I would definitely do sort of that approach, because you get the benefits of the autophagy and the cell repair from doing, you know, more of a lower carbohydrate approach. And then also I would prolong the eating window, or I'm sorry, shorten the eating window, you know, so having, let's say, dinner at a certain time, you know, 7 o'clock, and then not having breakfast until, you know, 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. So you're going at least 12, 13, 14 hours between breakfast, or I'm sorry, between dinner the previous day and then breakfast the following day. So you have some benefits there, and that's made a lot easier when you go lower on the carbohydrates, because the body is able to burn fat more effectively. And so, you know, another benefit of burning fat more effectively is you actually suppress the appetite somewhat by being in nutritional ketosis. So that's a huge benefit, and so you don't really notice, you know, you're not hangry, you're not reaching for snacks, you're not, you know, ravenously hungry, and so the body can seamlessly burn dietary fat or glucose, and then it can also then seamlessly burn your own body fat when you don't have access to food. And so that's such a, you know, it's a cool thing to have happen, because if you miss a meal, it's not the end of the world. So you can just seamlessly burn your own body fat. And so being metabolically flexible, which means, you know, being able to burn whatever type of fuel, you're going to be a much more effective athlete. And so that's really the approach I would probably take, is, you know, going lower on the carbohydrates, going very high on the vegetable intake, you know, moderate protein, a little bit higher fat throughout the day, and then just timing the carbohydrates right in and around the workout, you know, maybe right before and then definitely right after, depending on the length and the intensity of that workout. You know, people think that we need a lot more carbohydrates than we actually do. And we do need some, but you know, I don't think we need near the amount that a lot of people think we do. So hopefully that was helpful. There's a lot to cover in that video, so if you have any questions, please comment below. And as always, thanks so much for watching.